Morning, everyone. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 43 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee is meeting to hear from witnesses on the study of federal assistance for various natural resource industries. Today we're in a hybrid format. Now that we're in session, no screenshots or pictures are allowed. A few organizational points. Please address your comments through the chair. I'll recognize you before speaking. For those participating by video conference, you'll need to activate your microphone and then unmute yourself after. There's interpretation available for those both in the room and online. You have the choice of floor, English, or French. Comments should be addressed through the chair. And for those in the room, if you'd like to speak, raise your hand and I'll acknowledge you. Online, use the raise hand function. And as part of our routine motions, please be informed to all committee members that witnesses have completed the required connection test in advance of our meeting. And so now today we have a number of witnesses virtually appearing. We have Thomas Gunton, and if I mispronounce anybody's names, I'll get you to correct it when you take the floor. From INSERVA, we have Andrea Hardy, Environmental Defense, Keith Brooks, Macdonald Laurier Institute, Kelvin Helen, and Heather Exner-Pirot. And in person, from the Office of the Parliamentary Budget Officer, we have Yves Giraud, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, and Philip Begnoli, and Resource Works Society, Stuart Muir. So welcome and good morning to everyone. We'll go right into our opening statements. And so first up, we'll go online to Mr. Gunton. And if you're ready, we'll turn the floor over to you. You have 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee. I am a professor in resource and environmental management at Simon Fraser University. I've also held senior positions in various provincial governments, including Assistant Deputy Minister of Energy and Mines, Deputy Minister of Finance, Deputy Minister of Environment. I will begin my remarks with a brief overview of fossil fuel subsidies, and followed by a more detailed review of the subsidy to Trans Mountain Pipeline, and conclude with a few recommendations. So no doubt, as the committee is aware, Canada has made a commitment to phase out fossil fuel subsidies at a number of meetings and in the mandate letter for the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Despite these commitments, we still provide significant subsidies in Canada, with estimates for 2020 ranging between $4.4 and $86 billion. The lower end of the range is an underestimate because it omits a number of subsidies, and the upper range includes environmental costs. So while there's a wide variation in different definitions and methodologies, these estimates show that fossil fuel subsidies are significant. The evidence also shows that we have not made significant progress in reducing these subsidies. According to the OECD, the subsidies provided in Canada by federal and provincial governments in 2020 were the highest level over the last 5 years. And we have rated last, along with France, among the 11 largest OECD countries in terms of reducing subsidies. I'd now like to focus on Trans Mountain Pipelines as an example of a subsidy. The Trans Mountain subsidy is not included in any of the estimates provided. In 2013, Trans Mountain submitted its application to increase the capacity on the pipeline from shipping oil from Alberta to Burnaby, British Columbia. And it was approved by the federal government in 2016 and again in 2019 after rehearing. In 2018, Kinder Morgan announced that it was suspending construction of TMX due to increasing financial risks, and in response, the Government of Canada purchased the pipeline in 2018. When Canada purchased Trans Mountain, the official estimate of the costs building the pipeline was $7.4 billion, and recently in 2022, these cost estimates were increased to $21.4 billion. Currently, the tolls approved by shippers on Trans Mountain are set to cover a capital cost of just the $7.4 billion, plus approximately about 25% of any additional capital cost increases. What this means is that the toll revenues will not cover the remaining 76% of the cost overruns, which is estimated at about a subsidy of $10.6 billion to the oil companies shipping on TMX. So this is a very significant subsidy. Tolls on other oil pipelines in Canada are set to fully cover costs with no government subsidies. Consequently, providing this subsidy on Trans Mountain creates an unlevel playing field among different pipeline companies and oil companies. It stimulates higher oil production and GHG emissions by reducing the shipping costs, and it poses a significant opportunity cost by consuming public funds that could otherwise be used in other ways. We completed a benefit cost study of Trans Mountain, including all the costs and benefits to Canada, and our conclusion was that there was a net cost in the range of 8.3 to 18.5 billion. That was with the old capital cost. We're just in the process of updating that with the new capital cost numbers of 21.4 billion, and those costs are going to be to Canada in the range of 15 to 25 billion dollars. Let me conclude by just outlining a couple of recommendations for dealing with fossil fuel subsidies. First, what we need to do is have a comprehensive inventory of the value of all fossil fuel subsidies using the WTO subsidy definitions. And this inventory should include an evaluation of the subsidies relevant to government objectives, such as reducing GHG emissions. Second, we need to publish an action plan to eliminate these subsidies that includes milestones, who is responsible. Third, we need to provide for independent monitoring and an annual public reporting to assess compliance with the plan, identify remedial actions to stay on course. And this plan should include elimination of the subsidy to TMX by directing Trans Mountain, which is owned by the government, to apply to the Canadian Energy Regulator for approval of tolls to cover the TMX full cost of service. And I conclude with saying that these measures, we will be able to deliver on our commitment to phase out fossil fuel subsidies. Thank you.
Great, and thank you. Right on the market, 5 minutes. I should have mentioned I have a handy visual cue system. I'll give you the yellow card when there's 30 seconds left in your statements, and the red card means the time's up. Don't stop mid-sentence, but wind up your thought, and then we'll move on to the next statements. So next up, I have online Andrea Hardy with Enserva. So if you're ready to take the floor, I'll start the clock when you start speaking. You'll have 5 minutes.
Great. Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. Thank you for the invite to appear today. My name is Andrea Hardy, and I'm here in my capacity as the Director of Health and Safety for Enserva, formerly the Petroleum Services Association of Canada. I'm also joined today by Maddie McMillan, Policy Analyst at Enserva, who is listening in and supporting over the phone line. I would also like to acknowledge that Enserva is headquartered within Treaty 7 in Calgary, Alberta, which is where I'm joining from today. In the spirit of reconciliation and to better honor Treaty 7, we acknowledge that we gather and work on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Eyas, Nakota Nations, as well as the Métis Nation Region 3. Our members, their operations, and the work of the association occurs throughout Canada, and Enserva remains committed to playing our part in reconciliation and growing relationships and opportunities. Enserva is a national trade association representing Canada's energy service, supply, and manufacturing sector. We are the energy sector's innovators, solution finders. The energy industry is a major global economic driver. In Canada, it accounted for 10.2% of the nominal GDP, which equates to $219 billion in 2019. Enserva helps to unlock Canadian energy by making connections, accessing resources, delivering policy solutions, providing insights that accelerate the energy evolution. Our members provide the energy workforce that the world needs to thrive with the most responsible and carefully regulated practices in the world. And we make the world a better place by reducing energy poverty, empowering energy transformation, and creating economic growth and jobs. Our sector encompasses just under 500,000 workers, and our members and their teams are preparing the energy supply chain to reach our net zero targets, provide sufficient capacity to ensure the future of energy security, and get Canada's energy where it needs to go. Enserva members are investing in Canada and equipping the next generation of workers with the tools, training, and know-how to pursue a long and fulfilling career in the energy sector. Enserva is well positioned to bridge the gap between the government, private sector, and many stakeholders we serve. So we appreciate the opportunity to speak at this committee. Our internal councils consist of leading industry experts in health and safety, human resources, environment, social and governance, or ESG, Indigenous relations, innovation, and tech, to name a few. This past September, our ESG Council launched Enserva's ESG Playbook, a resource that supports our members no matter where they are on their sustainability journey to navigate the legal, regulatory, and social norms that are rapidly changing in our sector. Canada is leading the way in ESG best practices, and we're proud of our members' contributions from reducing fugitive emissions in the production of blue hydrogen, remediating soil and fill well above regulation and standards, to supporting STARS Air Ambulance and countless other service groups across the country. Another important initiative for Enserva members is the Site Rehabilitation Program. This program supports important work our sector has already been doing regarding environmental stewardship and ESG, as it helps accelerate environmental cleanup and create jobs. With almost $1 billion going out in grants as of October 6, 2022 in just Alberta, the SRP program has made an important impact in unlocking Canadian energy, creating jobs, and increasing the quality of life for many Canadians. In addition, as of October 31st, 2022, the Saskatchewan program has completed over 6,400 well abandonments, over 3,000 flow line abandonments, 60 facilities, and over 11,000 site remediation and reclamation activities, all while maintaining over 1,400 full-time equivalent jobs in the sector. The SRP program is specifically for the energy services sector, and during a time where our sector has seen significant labor crunch, the program has helped keep workers in the industry who have very technical skills to provide these services employed. The people who are completing the SRP work are the same people who will be doing the very technical work in Canada's energy evolution and our partners on the road to net zero. Investment in them is an investment in our future. These efforts have also enabled business growth amongst Indigenous partners and contractors through direct opportunities and meaningful business relationships. Enserva hopes to see this program continue as the SRP program cleans up the environment and helps create jobs in Canada's energy services, supply, and manufacturing sector. It is a welcome investment, and we support our Indigenous partners in their advocacy to extend the program. For over 40 years, Enserva has been a strong advocate of Canada's energy service, supply, and manufacturing sector to all levels of government, our customers, and to Canadians. We are a collaborative partner on several government committees and councils across Canada. We also work together with our industry partners on policy initiatives such as regulatory modernization and harmonization. Just this year, our members are reporting more than 2,000 employment vacancies that we must fill to ensure both domestic and global energy needs are met. As we know, without a sustainable and diverse workforce that is ready for the jobs of today and tomorrow, our sector's ability to keep up with the global energy demand will no doubt be hindered. We share a common goal of ensuring Canada's energy sector is efficient, successful, and sustainable for many years to come. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm pleased to respond to your questions.
Excellent. Thank you for your opening comments. Next, we will go online with environmental defense to Keith Brooks. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to speak to you today about this important topic. My name is Keith Brooks. I'm the Programs Director at Environmental Defense. I just want to acknowledge that I'm sitting in today for my colleague, Julia Levin, who's our resident expert on what this committee is referring to as federal assistance for the oil and gas industry and what we generally refer to as fossil fuel subsidies. As I'm sure the committee members are all aware, Environmental Defense tracks fossil fuel subsidies closely. In 2020, we pegged federal subsidies at $18 billion. In 2021, the figure was $8.6 billion. And federal subsidies in 2022 so far amount to over $18 billion. Again, that's not including the subsidies around Trans Mountain that Mr. Gunton referred to. These are direct transfers to fossil fuel industry, fossil fuel companies. And that's just the subsidies that we can track because many are not available to the public. These subsidies include monies allocated to support R&D for carbon capture and storage, money from the Net Zero Accelerator earmarked to reduce emissions at oil and gas companies, and other funds. Our running tally can be found on our website at environmentaldefense.ca. The full link can be shared afterwards. Of the $18.4 billion, Export Development Canada has given out $5.96 billion in subsidies in 2022, according to Export Development Canada's own figures. And a subsidy of about $12 billion has been allocated directly to the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion, $10 billion of which is in the form of a loan guarantee. Canada is very generous in this regard. To put it in context, a report from Bloomberg New Energy Finance found that from 2015 to 2019, the government of Canada provided $100 million to the fossil fuel sector and raised its level of support to fossil fuels by 40% over those years, which is the second largest increase among G20 countries. Globally, Canada provides more public financing to oil and gas than any of the other G20 OECD countries. I know that some of this debate about subsidies gets hung up on differences of opinion concerning what counts as a subsidy and, in some cases, what counts as an inefficient subsidy. It's our opinion that all support given to the oil and gas sector should be considered as fossil fuel subsidies, and that fossil fuel subsidies are inherently inefficient. And when it comes to the definition of subsidy, we suggest that Canada harmonize with the international community and adopt the WTO's definition of the term subsidy. The definition contains three elements. It's a financial contribution by a government or any public body which confers a benefit. In the WTO's definition, the financial contribution includes grants, loans, loan guarantees, and incentives. And the WTO says that the existence of a benefit is to be determined by comparison with the marketplace, i.e. on the basis of what the recipient could have received in the market. So a loan guarantee, for example, that's intended to de-risk private equity would clearly fit this bill. Now, with respect to the question of inefficient subsidies, or whether giving tax breaks and other incentives to reduce emissions should be counted, this too has been explored. In fact, the G20 commitment describes inefficient fossil fuel subsidies as those that, among other things, impede investment in clean energy sources and undermine efforts to deal with the threat of climate change. Given the scarcity of capital, a subsidy to oil and gas companies can well be seen as impeding investments in clean energy sources, or how else can we explain why subsidies for fossil fuels exceed those for clean energy? And they most certainly undermine efforts to deal with the threat of climate change because they make the construction and expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure viable when it would not otherwise be so, and they delay and obfuscate what is actually needed to reduce emissions in Canada and the world, which is to phase out fossil fuels. Subsidies for carbon capture and storage are extremely inefficient. The Canadian public has spent $5.8 billion on CCUS since 2000. Collectively, these expensive projects have captured only 3.5 megatons of carbon per year, which is 0.05% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions. And 70% of the carbon captured has been used for enhanced oil recovery, which is actually increasing oil production. So these public subsidies have likely resulted in more emissions and not less. I would further like to argue that fossil fuel subsidies are inefficient in Canada as they run directly counter to one of Canada's most prominent climate policies, carbon pricing. Effectively, subsidies for the fossil fuel sector act as a negative price on carbon. Subsidies for cleanup also run counter to the polluter pay principle, which is the foundational concept underpinning carbon pricing in Canada. I want to make one final point, which is that Canada promised to phase out international fossil fuel finance a year ago at COP26. That's a great thing. Specifically, the agreement says the countries will, quote, end new direct public support for the international unabated fossil fuel sector by the end of 2022. I think Canada should recognize that its fossil fuel sector is international. We export nearly 4 million barrels of oil per day. Smoothing the way for domestic oil and gas production intended for export should be viewed as support for the international fossil fuel sector. Indeed, it's Export Development Canada that provides all of these subsidies. Thank you, committee members, for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm happy to take any questions when the time comes.
Great, thank you for your comments. Continuing online, we'll go to the representatives from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. I believe Heather Exner-Pirot, Senior Fellow, will be giving the opening statements, and Heather is accompanied by Calvin Helene, CEO of Insight Advisors. So when you're ready, you'll have 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members, and to you today. My expertise, on resource geopolitics and Indigenous engagement in Canadian resource development, and I'll focus my brief remarks on those issues. To briefly set the context, the COVID pandemic and the Russian invasion of Ukraine has heightened our awareness and concerns about the security of our supply chains. As a top global exporter of oil, gas, lumber, nickel, uranium, grains, oil seeds, and other resources, our allies are turning to us as friendshoring becomes not only an economic, but a security imperative. Canada is the largest oil exporter of any OECD country and the only OECD country in the top 10 globally for proven reserves. It is not an exaggeration to say that the energy security of our allies in the decades to come will rely on Canada continuing to export significant quantities of oil and gas. The consequences of becoming reliant on authoritarian regimes to supply the world with its biggest source of energy are dire, as we are seeing in Europe already. The programs that NRCan and EDC have to support businesses in the oil and gas industry are important to continue, But as has been discussed here, Canadians get back much more than what governments put in. According to a recent report by Peters & Co., the oil and gas industry alone will be providing over $50 billion in royalties and taxes to federal and provincial governments in 2022. As all sides of the political spectrum are committed to reconciliation with Indigenous peoples in Canada, one of the best opportunities the federal government has to address both the need to supply more energy and resources to our allies and advance the economic and social well-being of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples is to provide low-interest guaranteed loans that enable Indigenous peoples to take equity positions, ownership stakes in major projects. This can de-risk projects, attract investment, and allow development to happen at a faster pace, ensure Indigenous interests are included when deciding environmental, cultural, and safety issues, and provide stable own source revenue streams to those communities. The Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation is an example of such a model and has provided significant financial support for the recent equity position in 7 pipelines in the Athabasca region by 23 communities, as well as the Northern Courier Pipeline System deal with 8 Indigenous communities also in Northern Alberta. The federal government has not made such loans available to Indigenous peoples for deals in the natural gas and oil industry, despite the incredible own source revenue opportunities in that sector. In my opinion, this is an error. Which brings me to TMX. It is widely anticipated that the government will sell TMX to Indigenous consortium when it's completed, something which I believe can be transformative in terms of the revenues it will generate and the economic self-determination it will provide. I hope all parties will support a deal when the time comes. And I'll note that my colleague Calvin Helene here is well placed to answer questions on First Nations involvement and interest in major resource projects. But I also want to iterate, in my opinion, that the wrong lesson to draw from TMX is that cost overruns is a money loser in oil and gas for Canadian taxpayers. The correct lesson, in my view, is that a pipeline that can be built for $7 billion 10 years ago now takes well over $20 billion due to our
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you just for a second. We're picking up an echo that just started. I don't know if you can adjust your the boom on your headset perhaps, or what's happening, but just want to make sure our interpreters can hear. Okay, it just started, so I don't know what happened here. Okay, it seemed a mic in the room might have been accidentally turned on, so I've stopped your time. So if you want to try again, we'll make sure that we're cleaned up here so that everybody can hear the audio clearly. So back to you.
Sure. The correct lesson, in my view, is that a pipeline that could have been built for $7 billion 10 years ago now takes well over $20 billion due to our political, legal, and regulatory systems. And this is a huge problem that needs to be addressed. We seem to only be discussing TMX because the federal government owns it, but project proponents in the private sector have to deal with cost overruns, regulatory burdens, and legal delays all the time. It is a sap on our productivity and prosperity, and a barrier to, as Minister Freeland puts it, fast-tracking energy and resource projects that our allies need so badly. The best assistance the government can provide to the natural resource sector is to reform the regulatory system and make investment in natural resources more competitive and attractive in Canada. Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you for your comments. And sorry about that interruption. Just the last part was good. Once we got over that little glitch. Okay, next we're going to go within the room to the Office of the Parliamentary Budget Officer, to our Parliamentary Budget Officer, Yves Giroux. The floor is yours.
Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs.
Chair, ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee, good morning. We'd like to thank you for your invitation to appear before you today. We are happy to be here to discuss our analysis related to your study of federal support for the natural resource industries. With me today is Philippe Bagnoli, analyst consultant in my office. In keeping with the Parliamentary Budget Officer's mandate, which is to provide independent and non-partisan analysis to Parliament, my office published reports on the cost of the federal tax provisions related to fossil fuels, as well as the value of the waiver of farm activities from the federal carbon tax, as well as a financial analysis of the Trans Mountain gas pipeline. I will now continue in English.
Our report, entitled Energy Sector in Agriculture Federal Revenue Foregone from Tax Provisions, which was published on December 7, 2021, in response to a request from Senator Galvez, estimates that resource-specific expense claims by oil, gas, and coal mining corporations reduced annual federal tax revenue by $1.8 billion on average from 2015 to 2019. Further, the carbon levy exemption for agriculture was worth an estimated $179 million in 2019 when the levy was $20 per ton. This figure will rise significantly as the levy increases to $170 per ton. We would be pleased to respond to any questions you may have regarding our analysis related to the natural resource sector or other PBO work. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. And lastly, for opening statements, we will go to Resource Works Society. And speaking, we have Stuart Muir, Executive Director, within the room. So whenever you're ready, please take the floor.
Thank you, Chair, for the chance to come here from Vancouver to speak to the committee. Since 2014, the Resource Works Society, a not-for-profit based in Vancouver, has been conducting public interest advocacy. Myself, I'm a former journalist. I was national editor, business editor of the Vancouver Sun. I worked through Canadian Press with the Globe and Mail and the Toronto Star to streamline business processes in those companies, and I continue my work in this domain. So it's a privilege to be here. The Canadian government really has only so many levers at its disposal to be able to affect what companies do. There are very good reasons to use incentives, some might call them subsidies, in order to exert public policy. We sometimes hear the belief that a dollar deployed in one area equals a dollar withheld from another. We hear this in subsidies all the time. That's simply not how things work. Let me give you a little example from British Columbia, where $80 billion in upstream natural gas investment was triggered by $2 billion worth of subsidies in the form of deep well royalty credits. Great social and climate benefit was created by bringing this lower emission fuel to market because of those subsidies. I would challenge anyone to show me a more productive return on subsidy dollars from any sector that is supported in any way by subsidies. That's a pretty good ratio. Nevertheless, the industry, I feel, has faced an onslaught of opposition on the grounds that the credits were handouts, representing the one-way flow of public funds to private interests for no public benefit, which is really the exact opposite of the truth. When you listen carefully to what corporate Canada is asking for, and I'm not here to advocate for them, I'm observing this, they quite reasonably would prefer a hand up in a highly competitive world and not a handout. You don't see that. In 2022, more decision makers around the world are realizing that the simplistic conceptions of energy systems can no longer be indulged if we want to be serious about climate change. 3 examples of this. In July, the European Union passed the Complementary Climate Delegated Act, recognizing that natural gas power plants are climate friendly. That's their definition. I'm not making it up. President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act was passed in August. It's deploying billions of dollars of subsidies to achieve green goals via the private sector. How are they doing this? They're doing it through an enhanced carbon capture tax credit. They're spurring other climate-friendly technologies like hydrogen, advanced nuclear reactors, sustainable aviation fuel, and many, many other things. Now, I know the act here in Canada has been applauded by some because it's relying on subsidies and criticized by others because it relies on subsidies. There you go. In Egypt last weekend, the final text of COP27 recognized the place of low emissions energy in climate action. And until now, COP language has been narrowly focused on promoting renewables, which are an important part of the solution, but not the complete solution to energy transition. This shift, which was urged by the International Energy Agency and approved by almost 200 nations, is light on detail at this point. It has attracted some criticism. Nevertheless, it's a clear sign of growing awareness that the world cannot wish its way to decarbonization goals by focusing solely on a very narrow band of sources. Taken together, these 3 developments signal to me a positive trend for climate pragmatism. And to conclude, I would say that subsidies have their use. They should be seen in perspective. It's not about consumer fuel giveaways. The Ministry of Finance will tell us that we've already flushed out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, so there's that. Let's recognize that it's market forces, the pursuit of profit, that will be the greatest force of change that certainly the Biden dogma. Numerous factors affect how government should decide climate and industrial policy via efficient markets. They have many levers at their disposal. Emissions reduction, worker earnings growth is a goal, investment conditions, Indigenous reconciliation, skills and employment, regional development, energy security, market access, energy reliability and affordability, availability of alternatives, things like critical minerals and energy metals that are needed for that we can produce in this country for mass electrification. These are all considerations. It's not just subsidies in this very narrow discussion. You really need to broaden it. A huge increase in low emissions energy is going to be needed if the world is to hit climate targets. And the fossil fuels versus renewables narrative is increasingly proving to be difficult and impeding factor in this. At this time, there's no evidence that a better path exists if you're serious about climate goals than to pursue what I've laid out.
Okay, thank you. And now we're going to get right into our rounds of questions. First up, I have Ms. Stubbs, who will have 6 minutes on the clock, and then we have 3 other 6-minute questions before we go into another rotation. So, Ms. Stubbs, over to you when you're ready.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to all the witnesses for taking the time to participate in our meeting today. Very much appreciate Heather and Stuart for putting the sector in context. There will be this ongoing debate around definitions of subsidies versus benchmark tax and fiscal treatment for industries and businesses across the country. But it is, I think, important if there are proponents who are going to say all these fiscal measures, all these tax treatments count as subsidies. Therefore, there should be a consideration about the return on investment, value for tax dollars, and public good. And certainly, I think in proportion, the billions of dollars in annual tax revenue to all 3 levels of government would show major value in that regard. And I'd invite in your responses any opportunity you want to take to expand on those concepts. But as a person who also believes in a level playing field and isn't a fan of corporate welfare, I wonder if Stuart from ResourceWorks and Andrea from Enserva, if you might want to expand on Canada's investment climate for the natural resources sector now, how we are viewed worldwide, whether or not we remain a first choice country to do business in the natural resource sector. So I just, go to Stuart and to Andrea.
Yeah. If I may, I would like to provide a little information on TMX because there's a lot more discussion of that than I expected. It is quite germane to your to the question of the member, Chair. I checked in with Trans Mountain management last week. They're based out west, and asked them what's going on with the project. So as of October 31st, there's 15,800 individuals actively employed in the project. It's going to be 4/5, 80% complete by the end of this calendar year. Over 3,000 Canadian hires come from outside of BC and Alberta, which is not a surprise because we also knew that TMX jobs would be distributed all across the country, even in Quebec and Ontario. Over the life of the project, more than 28,000 individuals have worked on Trans Mountain, including 3,059 Indigenous persons, I'm told. A little note from my own research, or research I've viewed, the Urban Futures Institute has shown that jobs in natural resources create 5 or 6 times the impact on GDP, just because they are things that create resource commodity exports and contribute directly. 5 or 6 times greater impact than the average job. These 15,000 individuals have the impact on the economy of 75,000 average workers when you think about it. So it's not a bad return on investment. In terms of the international focus, why was it that TMX was not able to keep a large foreign company as its driver? Why did Ottawa acquire the project? Well, obviously, there was a project in the national interest. At the time that decision was made, Canada had begun to see a mass exodus from particularly the Alberta oil patch, as many international companies that had invested in what they thought were the the economic strategies being employed in that province when they realized that those were not going to come about because of policy. So the very direct, there's many studies and reports that have tried to measure the impact on it. I won't attempt to relate those, but I think anecdotally, for what it's worth, there certainly is a sense. It's maybe a little bit past now. It was stronger in 2017, 18, 19 that there was a punishing regime for investment. There was almost a class of workers, young men in particular in Alberta, whose future expectations were crushed. Hundreds of thousands of workers. I know people are puzzled about things like the trucker convoy. Where did that come from? Well, when you take whole generations of people and suddenly end the things they were aspiring to, and then you have side effects, it's not as surprising for those who observe things closely in Alberta, perhaps, not to wade into that issue, but the investment outlook, I think, continues to be dampened. Canada, I recently traveled in India and Turkey. It doesn't have the level of excitement when people talk about investing into energy in Canada that it used to. Should that be the case is a matter of judgment, but I think that any bankers, all you have to do is go to Bay Street. They'll tell you what their numbers show far better than I can. The overall sense in Alberta continues to be that the great wealth and positive impact on environmental performance that can be supplied by the Canadian oil and gas sector has been, deliberately forsaken.
I think we only have, almost done here. Okay, thanks, Chair.
Heather, was it Heather you want, or Andrea?
Andrea, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, half a minute if you want to.
Sure, yes, throw it over, please.
Sure, I'll jump in for a quick half a minute, but investments hampered in part by the Inflation Reduction Act, with folks finding better bang for their buck in the States than here. And because of labor shortages, difficulty in gaining equipment here, it's just easier to go south. So we see more rigs in the American Midwest than Western Canada. And that jeopardizes our capacity for net zero and our capacity to unlock our energy today. There are tools to improve this, flow through shares for investors to clean up well sites and grow capital. Other options are government grants, hand-ups, not handouts, and they can help monetize our fleets and change the narrative back to Canada's favor. And I'll leave that there.
Okay, thank you. And unfortunately, Mr. Calvin, Helene, we're not going to get to you on this one, but we may get back to you on another round of questions. Next up, we have Vivian Lapointe. Madame Lapointe, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you. My first question is to Ms. Exner-Pirot. In April, you wrote a piece on the opportunities presented from what you called a nuclear renaissance. So could you provide this committee with some information on what this opportunity could look like, and how should Canada capitalize on this opportunity?
Thank you so much for the question. I could talk about nuclear all day. As you guys probably know, northern Saskatchewan, I'm from Saskatchewan, has probably the richest reserves of uranium in the world in the Athabasca Basin, and has done quite a good job actually of involving Indigenous communities in that, and could really supply uranium and nuclear fuel needs for generations, hundreds of years, to our allies and to ourselves. So we had this incredible opportunity. I think perhaps there was some opposition or some hesitation from the federal government side on nuclear, but not in recent months. Everything that has been coming out of NRCan and out of Canada in the last few months has been very positive for nuclear, and is really positioning Canada to be a leader in that space. In terms of small modular reactors, not only the federal government, but the provinces are leading the way. Private companies are leading the way. Uranium companies, Cameco and Brookings recently bought Westinghouse, which is a major builder of reactors, and small modular reactors, regular ones also. And so there are very many positive things happening in Canada in the nuclear space, which I'm very proud about and happy about. The one thing that the Americans are doing maybe a bit better or differently than us is supporting some direct subsidies to develop nuclear fuel capacity globally, and especially when we think about energy security and helping our allies get off of coal, especially heating oil, that kind of thing, and moving to nuclear and getting off of Russian dependence. Russia is the biggest supplier of nuclear fuel in the world. It's going to be very important that Canada and our partners be able to supply that nuclear fuel ourselves. And so the Department of Energy has been supporting that, and it would be great if Canada could also do that so that, the supply chain isn't ultimately just decided by the Americans.
Okay, you touched on global security of energy sources. And given today's global energy sector, how important is it, in your opinion, for Canada to have its own secure, value-added supply chain for critical minerals?
That's a great question. There's certainly more that we could be doing. We are the second largest country in the world and probably have the most, we're only the number 8 in terms of mining value. Number 1 is China and number 2 is Russia. And so it's incredibly important for ourselves and our allies that we develop more critical minerals. And I know there's been some good push in the government to start kind of planting some seeds on that, but the regulatory system is still a huge barrier to actually getting investment into mines that get developed and start producing those minerals. But it's hard to do a whole critical mineral supply chain just in Canada with 40 million people. It pretty much has to be done at least with North American integration, probably with integration starting with our Asian allies and European allies. And so I think people are at least talking about that. Again, the American military is investing in Canadian mining and impact assessments. And that's a wild thing that, that Canada should be doing what at least the American military is doing. But the bigger point is that everyone sees how important it is that Canada step up its game in critical minerals. The IEA says that to reach net zero, we need 6 times more mining than we have today. And we are nowhere near on track to do that in terms of the investment that we actually see.
Okay. Mr. Helen, I see you have your hand up. Did you want to add some comment to that as well? You're on mute.
How's that? I didn't have a comment relating to that particularly. I wanted to give a bit of an Indigenous perspective on natural resource development and some of these issues. Is that permitted, Chair?
Yeah, I'll leave it to Ms. Lapointe. So she says yes, that's fine.
First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the Indigenous people where I'm at, the Salishan in Vancouver, and the Indigenous people in Ottawa. And I'm actually not too sure who they are before I speak. I was the advisor to the Kenney government in setting up the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. And it's provided essentially loan guarantees to Indigenous groups to get involved in the natural resources sector. And I think there's a great frustration in the Indigenous community that their interests in becoming active participants in the economy are being frustrated by government policy, particularly in the natural resources sector. There's a huge interest in instead of managing our poverty, getting back to the prosperity that existed prior to Europeans coming to the Americas. There's a real need, since we were deprived of our traditional territories, for us to be able to have access to capital. And I would recommend the federal government look at something like this program on a national basis. I think there's a role for subsidies. Certainly, in my lifetime, I've watched subsidies in every industry in Quebec. The 2 big names that come to mind are Bombardier and SNC-Lavalin. There is a role for subsidies. There is a role for government. Where government steps outside of its role, I believe it creates unnecessary costs and burdens on the taxpayer. I think the TMX pipeline is one example of that. You had a pipeline that was going to be built for $7 or $7.5 billion.
Yeah, sorry, I'm going to have to
Thanks.
stop. We're over the time here, but you may be able to continue on when we get to another round of questions. But I'm now going to need to move to our next member, who is Monsieur Simard. And Monsieur Simard, you're going to have 6 minutes.
Merci, John.
Thank you. Mr. Giroux, briefly, in June you concluded that Trans Mountain is no longer a profitable undertaking. When I consulted in 2013, Kinder Morgan felt that the pipeline was not profitable. And if we look at the 2019 figures, where there were tolls on a $7.4 billion project, it was already borderline. So my question is this. Are we dealing with a political project or an economic project when we talk about extending the pipeline?
C'est la question à laquelle
You are better placed to answer that question than I am. My role is essentially to determine whether the pipeline in its current form falls within the current parameters as known and is within these parameters likely to generate profits or not, only considering the pipeline itself and the expenses incurred to build it and extend it, as well as the revenues that are forecast. So my analysis is limited to that. So what I understand then is that it's unlikely that the project will generate profits. If I read your analysis, it's unlikely. So I'm not going to put any words in your mouth, but I see it no longer being an economic project, but rather a political one. Now, I've heard on several occasions Minister Guilbeault and the Deputy Prime Minister saying that the money that was going to come out of Trans Mountain was going to be invested in green energy. So how can we reinvest deficit money into clean energy? Do you have an answer for that? Based on our analysis, there will be no profits or revenues available to reinvest unless certain fundamental parameters change, or if the time comes to sell the pipeline, somebody from the private sector would be willing to pay more than what we believe to be the fair market value. So it is possible that at that point there would be profits, but for the time being, this is not what's envisaged. Obviously, there would be greater advantages for the Canadian economy, not only the profits generated by the pipeline, but if we are only looking at the cash flows that are anticipated and past, it is unlikely. So in other words, to put it briefly, in the current state, it is unlikely that there will be any reinvestment of pipeline funds into pipeline revenues into renewable energy. Correct. I like your answer. Now, have you conducted any studies to determine what constitutes a fossil fuel grant for the federal government? Does the PBO have an idea of what the federal government is investing in the gas and oil sector? We don't have an exact idea as to the total investment in the oil and gas industry. First of all, it's difficult to determine what is a subsidy, what is specific to the oil and gas sector versus tax benefits that are available across the economy. So we didn't look at all of tax and direct assistance to the oil and gas industry. However, as I've already mentioned during my opening remarks, a senator asked us to estimate the tax assistance looking at specific parameters for the oil and gas sector, and we did do that. That does not, of course, include all grants or assistance, direct assistance to the industry. So I'm a public decision maker. I'm in a committee, and we've decided to look at what kind of support is offered to the natural resource industry. But I cannot get a clear picture of what's being invested in the oil and gas sector. To me, this is a major problem. How can we base our decision-making process? How can we compare, let's say, the forestry sector and the oil and gas sector if I am in no position to define what is a subsidy? Do you agree with my analysis? Absolutely. It makes your task a very difficult one if you don't have complete information. difficult or actually impossible. We cannot draw any comparisons. Well, without having a clear picture of the government resources allocated or the fiscal assistance being offered to each sector, it's difficult to determine what the level is, is it too high or too low. In the past, you conducted analyses and studies which consider the environmental costs. If I'm not mistaken, you did it in one of your more recent reports. Have you considered these environmental costs in the report that you prepared on Trans Mountain? No, we only considered the construction costs as well as the profits or revenues to be generated by the pipeline throughout its useful life. So in other words, there would be another analysis that could be possible looking into the environmental issues, which would make the Trans Mountain profitability even less attractive. It is possible. It's difficult to do, but it is possible. Some other witnesses have conducted this kind of study. Okay, to your knowledge, I heard Mr. Guilbeault during the election campaign say that by 2023 they were going to end direct, indirect, and subsidies and tax benefits for the oil and gas sector. Early this week, somebody came and said, yes, we're going to end the direct subsidies, but not the indirect ones, and not the tax relief. Could you describe what these tax shelters and indirect investments or benefits are? Well, after Senator Galvez's request, we were able to estimate the tax measures, and the tax benefits based on 5 types of measures total $2.4 billion, specifically for the oil and gas and coal industry. This came from a report that we published in 2021, December of 2021, at the request of Senator Galvez. Sometimes I see figures being quoted regarding what kind of tax breaks are given to the oil and gas sector every year. The figure that comes up frequently, Mr. Gunton recently talked about $4.4 to $86 billion. Do you have a more specific idea of what this figure could be? Unfortunately, no. We would have to consider all of the direct and indirect measures, and we have not conducted a study on that. So we don't have that picture? Not yet. Thank you.
We're now going to go to Mr. Angus. And Mr. Angus, you'll have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Under this Prime Minister, Canada has missed every single environmental promise and target they've made. At COP26, the Prime Minister and Mr. Guilbeault made 2 big promises. One was the emissions cap, and we've never seen anything more about that. And the second was the Glasgow Statement, the landmark agreement to stop providing public financing for fossil fuels by the end of 2022. Mr. Brooks, you claim that Canada is the largest financier of fossil fuels, more than China, more than the United States, more than the UK and Germany. Could you tell us what those subsidies are this year under this government?
So the subsidies that we have tracked don't include any tax relief, and they don't include the environmental costs of climate change. For example, the $18 billion, actually almost $19 billion that we've tracked for 2022 include $12 billion directly for Trans Mountain, $10 billion of which is a loan guarantee, and another $2 billion of which is also a loan or financing, actually preferential financing. And then Export Development Canada recently updated their statistics on their website. It's readily available. You can look at it. They have given direct support to the oil and gas sector to the tune of $5.96 billion in 2022. And they don't break down, the details of what that support actually looks like.
Okay, thank you for that. Ms. Friedland, Deputy Prime Minister, has stated that carbon capture investments are essential if Canada is going to meet its climate targets, because this is about emissions. And yet, Mr. Brooks, you say that they're using carbon capture tax money for carbon capture to increase oil production. Can you explain?
Well, 70% of the investment in carbon capture to date that's been made by Canada has gone towards enhanced oil recovery. And so that's resulted in more emissions rather than less. Though I would note that the carbon capture tax credit actually does exclude advanced oil recovery, and we're happy to see that. But nonetheless, carbon capture, utilization, and storage is very inefficient, very ineffective, will not get us to net zero. There's no carbon capture anywhere happening at scale, and certainly not at capture rates approaching anywhere near 100%, which is what we would require, of course, to get to zero.
Mr. Gunton, I want to turn to you because this issue of the tolls, being that the cost overruns of TMX are so extraordinary, that there is no business case because there's no shipper on the planet who's going to pay the tolls that would be required, and that toll is somewhere in the nature of 80%. That's an extraordinary free gift and subsidy to big oil, don't you think?
Yes, that's certainly correct. The tolls, as I said, were set on the basis of the $7.4 billion capital cost, not for the $21.4 billion that we're currently spending. So tolls are going to be charged to oil shippers are roughly 50% discount as to what the economic tolls should be. You could certainly increase tolls and make that still a competitive for shippers, because you could use as a benchmark the tolls that are being charged on shipping to the U.S. Gulf and other places as an indicator. That would allow you for a significant increase in tolls to recover some of that public finance.
I asked that because one of the things Mr. Guilbeault stated, the reason we needed TMX is that we were going to make all this profit from it, and then that money could be used to help support clean energy, which always struck me kind of like drinking your way to sobriety. But if the tolls that the Canadian Energy Regulator has kept in place are there will not be profit from this, correct? This will be the taxpayers' ongoing subsidy of every single barrel that's shipped to the tune of 80%, unless we renegotiate and say that they have to be shipped on an actual cost basis. Would you say that would be what we would need in order to get any money back from this boondoggle?
Well, you definitely should increase the tolls. Right now, as I say, it's a subsidy of about 50% on the tolls for each barrel of oil that is shipped. And if you increase the tolls, you still will not generate money for other activities. You will just simply be reducing the losses on the $21.4 billion investments. But that's obviously a useful thing to do, and certainly should be pursued.
I'm interested because when I look at what the International Energy Agency states in terms of projected oil projects and development in the coming years, they say oil gas production will drop by 75% by 2050. The Canadian Energy Regulator sees that Canada continues to produce basically the same amount that they're producing now in 2050, and we see a major investment in subsidizing that production and promoting through Export Development Canada massive export markets, even though the IEA is saying this market is going to disappear. Are Canadians being set up for seriously stranded assets from this heavily subsidizing of the oil and gas sector as the market is changing?
Yes, you're absolutely right. The International Energy Agency most recent report forecasts to achieve net zero, an 80% reduction by 2050. Even under different scenarios, oil production demand peaks around 2025, and if we continue to expand the oil and gas sector, we will be creating stranded assets. So that money could be better used for other investments and transition to different growth sectors.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're now going to go into a slightly shorter round. First up for 5 minutes, I have Mr. Falk, to be followed by Mr. Shahal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all our witnesses this morning for the information you've provided to committee. I'd like to begin my questions with Mr. Giroux. Thank you for attending committee. Appreciate that. A lot of discussion about TMX, and so I'm going to follow that up a little bit. It's been noted that the original projected cost of the project was $7 billion, and that's risen to $21 billion. Do we have a reason for that 300% increase in cost?
My understanding is that My understanding is that this has been due to delays in the construction itself. But beyond that, I think that question would probably be better answered by the Trans Mountain pipeline owner themselves, so Trans Mountain Corporation, which is being held by CDEV under the responsibility of the Department of Finance.
Okay, yeah, because we hear the costs have gone up. We just never hear any rationale for those costs other than it's been delayed. But delay, if it's simply a matter of delay is time, and that's interest on money. So, also some discussion about the subsidies to oil and gas industry, in particular to TMX. $10 billion of the $12 billion commitment to support for TMX this year is by way of a loan guarantee. Based on your analysis, do you expect that loan guarantee to be realized?
A loan guarantee is not necessarily an expense. So, and to my knowledge, the government has not written it off as a liability per se, so as a loss. So, therefore, the government probably fully expects it to be repaid. And I don't disagree with that assessment. So I don't think that the loan guarantee to the tune of $10 billion will mean a disbursement of that amount by the government of Canada.
Okay. And there's $12 billion of debt that's been incurred against TMX. Who holds that debt?
I think the debt is, I don't know exactly the precise details. I know it's being, it has been incurred by the Trans Mountain Corporation itself and a combination of CDEV, but I'd have to get back to you as to who holds the debt.
I'd be very interested in that, and I'd also be very curious whether they're paying commercial interest rates on that debt or whether it's at the sovereign rate. If you could get back to the committee with that information, I think that would be useful. And you answered the other question I had as to whether or not an anticipated repayment of a loan, if there's just a guarantee provided, whether that's a subsidy or whether it's just support. I think there's a significant distinction between the two, and I'm glad you recognize that. You also mentioned fair market value. Have you done an assessment as to fair market value based on from a revenue perspective of the TMX?
Yes, we looked at the expected flows of income from the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and based on the current arrangements, the tolling arrangements, and also on the assumption that after the first 20 years, 15 to 20 years, the same fee structure will apply. Things could change, obviously, but we have to make assumptions to expect or to come up with numbers over the lifetime, the expected lifetime of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. I'd also like to point out that...
Oh, and on that basis, sure. What's the fair market value?
Well, we expect that there's a difference between the pipeline cost and its expansion costs and the expected income flows of a negative $600 million. So it would be a loss of about $600 million. I'd also like to point out that in 2018, we were asked what would be the economic impact of a reduction in the discount at which the Western Canadian Select sells compared to WTI, which was one of the rationales for buying the pipeline in the first place. And we estimated at that time that a $5 reduction in the price of the discount at which WCS sells would increase nominal GDP at that time by $6 billion, which is one explanation probably behind the decision to purchase the Trans Mountain.
So this current government bought a project that had a book value of less than $1.5 billion and a projected project cost of roughly $3 billion and turned it into a $21 billion expenditure.
Well, that's...
Only a Liberal government could do that. But you don't have to comment on that, Mr.
Thank you.
God, James, don't look so shocked.
I might comment.
Do you have any analysis at all as to why the cost has risen from a projected $7 billion to $20 billion?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Yes, Chair.
End of the 5 minutes, but if you can do just a very brief summary, and then we got to move on.
Government of Canada has pointed out that the government revenue increase from TMX will be $46 billion over the course of the construction and the first 20 years, which I know the economic impacts of the project were not studied, as Mr. Giroux told the CBC. So the whole reason we're doing this project is to have economic impact. So to not consider that question in any analysis of it, to me, is an oddity of process. In terms of why is the situation what it is? Well, we missed the window of cheaper construction costs due to delays. So I count about 20 lawsuits that were brought forward by various pressure groups for the specific purpose of delaying and making the project more expensive. The end result is that the project has been made more expensive. So.
Yeah. But we're going to have to stop there, and you'll have more rounds coming up. So now, Mr. Shahal, over to you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for all the witnesses for your testimony today. Mr. Mayor, I'll start with you. And we've talked a lot about CCUS technology and its impact in our Western provinces, but how it's extremely important to meet and hit our targets moving forward. Have you done any analysis on how many jobs would be created and the economic impact of CCUS?
Short answer is no, I have not done that study. What I would say is that we have an example developing right now known as the Pathways Initiative, which represents, I think, half a dozen of the largest oil sands companies that have made a generational bet on CCUS. And what they're going to do is capture carbon. They're going to put it in a pipeline, and they're going to move it to a place in Alberta, in Cold Lake, where it can be injected underground and kept there for the length of time it'll be kept there, which is, I guess, forever. And that's a multi-billion-dollar transformation towards, according to this consortium or group, towards net zero oil sands, to take out the production side of carbon. So this group has deemed it to be a viable investment. I've mentioned already President Biden's bet on CCUS. I would note that we have seen the Boundary Dam in Saskatchewan as an early adopter. I know it's often criticized because it costs so much, and the benefits took a while to come along. To my surprise, I was in the UK a couple of years ago, and I was being told about the Teesside carbon capture project in the north of England, which was going to sequester carbon from the North Sea oil fields. And it was a consortium of, I think, Total and Shell and BP. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Where's the technology from? They said, oh, this is from Saskatchewan. They've got this great carbon capture thing. The company behind that in Saskatchewan can get meetings in China easier than in Canada, because somehow we have a cultural cringe about things we excel at ourselves. I think the carbon capture story has got a long way to go. Of course, it's going to need further investment and development. Everyone acknowledges that.
Well, I think you mentioned the Pathways, the tremendous economic impact that will make in Alberta and create thousands of jobs. So I'd like to see further analysis on that, on the numbers. But you mentioned the USA, President Biden, and the Inflation Reduction Act. What other areas of investment would you like to see from the Government of Canada to make sure we can compete, lead, and making sure we hit our goals and targets when it comes to reducing emissions, but also invest and create jobs and get that economic impact? What would you like to see from the government?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. I had a moment of insight yesterday. Bloomberg News, Ottawa Bureau, published an analysis of the Biden IRA plans and what it would mean from an Ottawa perspective. What are the opportunities for Prime Minister Trudeau and his government to operationalize the natural advantages we have? And I think what I took away from this, and I believe it's true, is that there's only so many things we can do well. We're only 40 million people. We have certain things we're very strong in. Ms. Exner-Pirot has mentioned critical minerals. I agree. Also, energy metals like copper and uranium. We have some lithium potential in this country. We should focus on a small number of things and try to do those really, really well. Draw those things from things we're already very good at, where we have natural resources, in the ground, and also human resources. I call it resource tech. It's not a term that's caught on yet, but I think it's actually one of our greatest contributors to Canadian prosperity, and it ought to be a category we talk about and take some pride in.
Thank you. I'd like to go to the Macdonald Laurier to Ms. Exir-Pirot. You talked about nuclear energy, and could you also comment on what are some of the areas of investment you'd like to see from the Government of Canada when we look at what support's provided by the U.S. and what we could do better?
Great question. So I would note and acknowledge that they did invest just under $1 billion into the SMR demonstration project, the biggest ever in the Canadian Infrastructure Bank. But what the Department of Energy doing is really looking at nuclear fuel and enriched nuclear fuel. And so most of the small modular reactors are going to need what we call HALEU fuel, high assay, low enriched uranium. And right now, Russia is the only commercial provider of those. So if we want to have kind of most of the SMR models fueled, we will need more of that. So the Americans have been investing to promote companies. It's high capital upfront cost to promote that, but it's restricted to facilities in the United States. And so even though, for example, Cameco has joint ventures with partners in the United States, only the partner in the United States can benefit from those government supports. So we might want to look at, if we want to be a leader in SMRs, we already have the uranium ourselves. We do already produce in Ontario. We do enrich fuel, but for the CANDU reactors, that seems like we might want to consider that as well. And the order is around $1.5 billion. So it is a lot of money, but it's not a given the market and the potential, it's not out of order.
Okay, thanks. We're out of time on that one. We're going to go now to Mr. Simard, who will have 2.5 minutes for his next round of questions.
Merci. Rapide.
Thank you. Briefly, Mr. Giroux, I think recently we had determined that there was no profitability for the Trans Mountain project. I'd like to look at the carbon capture profitability with you. There are two major projects in Alberta for carbon capture and sequestration. 57% of those projects come from public funding, and 57% is public funding. So I don't know whether you've ever conducted a study to analyze the situation? No, we have not yet examined the carbon capture projects and their profitability. What I do know about projects which have been implemented elsewhere in the world to date is that they're profitable only with a carbon tax and emissions pricing, which is considerable, as in $100 to $150. I don't know whether that's the case for the Canadian projects. So for these initiatives to be profitable, we would need significant carbon pricing. That is my understanding generally. And that's what's being done elsewhere in the world? Yes. What I'd like to know from you is this. I've been asking myself a question for quite some time. Is low emission, low carbon oil profitable? In various committees, we've been told about various initiatives saying that Canadian oil is one of the most ethical oils in the world, even though we know that the oil sands probably have the highest GHG footprint. So can we have low carbon oil production without state support? That depends on several factors, the main one being the price of oil on world markets. This is probably more of a hypothetical question than what I'm comfortable answering usually. I understand. Perhaps I could turn to Mr. Gunton. To your mind, is low carbon emitting oil profitable, or does this necessarily require state support?
Well, oil demand is declining worldwide. It's a declining industry, according to the IEA. So we're one of the highest cost producers in the world. So yes, if you wanted to continue expanding oil production, you'd have to provide subsidies, but that would impose a cost on the economy. You would probably be better off investing in growth sectors as opposed to a declining sector.
Okay, thank you.
Merci.
And we're going to go now to Mr. Angus for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Giroux, when the Parliamentary Budget Office comes out with a report, it's usually widely read. I noticed that the people from Canada Development Investment Corporation, who are in charge of the costs, hadn't bothered to read your report. I'm not suggesting they should, but I would think if they were paying attention to taxpayers' dollars, a report that says Trans Mountain no longer continues to be a profitable undertaking would be something that the person who's spending the money would actually be ready to rebut or actually have studied. Do you stand by your conclusion that Trans Mountain is no longer a profitable undertaking?
Yes, I haven't seen any substantial changes in economic conditions to require us to change that position.
And I look at what you've added, the present value, the cash flow, $3.9 billion, the original purchase price of $4.4 billion. That gives you a net value of $600 million. But what I don't see in there, again, are the long-term impact if we're subsidizing tolls. Mr. Gutton said that those subsidies would be in the order of $10.6 billion that Canadian taxpayers would pay shippers over the course of this pipeline, because there is no way they're going to make their money back without they have to subsidize the tolls because it's too much for the shippers. Do you think that the net value, the loss to taxpayers, is actually higher than $600 million?
It depends, obviously, as to what happens after the contracts that are in place expire. So we have assumed that the same type of arrangements will continue after the initial 15 to 20 year period, but that could be a different position in which we are in 15 or 20 years, and in that case, the valuation could significantly change.
So the prediction is that we are going to sell this pipeline to some other entity, but without subsidies, what an entity would take it. Would it be fair for the taxpayer to say if we sell it, that we sell it at what it costs, and that we should not be carrying ongoing subsidies to a third party to cover the cost of shipping for very profitable oil companies?
I think this can be sold without subsidizing per se future usage of the pipeline, but that would probably mean selling it at a loss is the essence of what we say in our report.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move now to Mr. Patzer, who has 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks, everybody, for coming today. Mr. Brooks, I'm just going to start with you here. If a company were to be a net negative emitter, is that a good thing?
Sure.
Would it matter which section or segment of the economy that it came from?
If they were net negative, I suppose not. Although the fossil fuel sector, we're talking about the emissions that come from the production of fossil fuels, but what's important to understand is that a lot of emissions come from the use and the combustion of fossil fuels. So even if we did have, say, net zero oil and gas production, the selling and the combustion of that oil and gas is still going to contribute to climate change. So I don't think that sector can ever actually be net zero.
Okay, so if we're looking at it on the production side, though, like there already is a company that is like largely net negative in Saskatchewan. There's another one in Alberta that is net negative. And actually, the one in Alberta is net negative at stage 1, 2, and 3, which is not just at the production side, but also on the usage side as well. So again, does it matter then what sector is doing? I guess what I'm trying to get at here is if the goal is ultimately emissions reduction, if these companies are doing it to the point where they're actually net negative, is that a good thing or is that not allowed?
If it were possible, it would be a good thing. But fossil fuels are hydrocarbons, And when they get burned, like we're using the hydrogen and releasing the carbon, and it combines with oxygen, becomes carbon dioxide. And that's what the combustion of fossil fuels are responsible for 80% or more of the emissions that have caused climate change to date. And I think you can't really get net zero oil and gas production. So I'm not familiar with the specific companies you're referring to, but I don't think it's possible on certainly not on scope 3 emissions. And I don't know that of any cases, in fact, where we're actually zero on the production side either.
Sure. Whitecap Resources in southeastern Saskatchewan in stage 1 and 2 combined in their 2021 report, they were negative about 740,000 tons on the negative side. So for that scope 1 and 2. So it is possible, it does happen. They use enhanced oil recovery for it, which is something that the Americans have included in their plan. This government doesn't have it in their plan. So again, if it's negative emissions, I mean, does it really matter? But again, I appreciate your input on this. Mr. Muir, you were talking about American subsidies and what they're doing and what we're doing here in Canada. I'm just wondering if you wanted to elaborate a little bit further on that, what we should be doing with the carbon capture, utilization, and storage to make it more competitive with what other countries are doing.
We've already seen one good Canadian company locate most of its activity to the U.S., where the climate is more welcoming. That's I forget their name, but they're based out of Squamish, BC. But most of the growth has been in the States because there has been a greater impetus to create market conditions. I mean, we talk about subsidies. We should also be talking about incentives to decarbonize. I think if you've mentioned Whitecap Resources, I've mentioned Pathways Initiative. I would challenge anyone to go into the filings, the regulatory filings of pretty much any publicly traded company in oil and gas in Canada, and have a look at what they're doing in the field. All of them are working to reduce their carbon footprint. They know and take, I think, pride in being part of that story. And I think the sort of characterizations of a whole sector as if it has some, inherent pernicious, evil, aim to it is a mischaracterization, and it sort of runs through, I think, some of the subsidy polemic that we've heard today. Very misleading. If the United States, President Biden, a Democrat president, has laid down a large bet on carbon capture, that is going to potentially draw more of the innovation from Canada to the United States, and we will lose it from our small energy startup sector. I think we need to be competitive to keep that know-how here.
Yep, exactly. Thank you. If anybody has more that they want to add to any of these issues, if you could submit a brief to the committee as quickly as possible, we'd appreciate that. Mr. Heelan, just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the importance that natural resource projects play for Indigenous communities and their ability for self-determination.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, most of the Indigenous communities across Canada are located in very remote places. In the average amongst all the reserve communities in Canada, the average unemployment rate is over 25%. That's worse than the Great Depression numbers in the U.S. And people have been living on their land for 10,000 years or longer. The people I come from, 14,000 years. And there are very few opportunities. That doesn't mean they're going to jump at any opportunity and abandon the environmental stewardship that they've taken over the land for all of that time. That is always at the forefront of their consideration in entering into any projects. And so when projects are proposed for their territory, they look at them very, very carefully, and they examine them from social and environmental point of view. And when they decide to enter into those projects, that may be the only opportunity they would have for any kind of development. In the community I'm from, Lac Aux Lamps, on the north coast of BC, there was an LNG pipeline proposed. At that time, my brother John was the elected chief of the community. The community voted 70% in favor of the project. The project would have flowed over a period of time about $1 billion in benefits to the community. That included monies for education, training and housing, roads, all the things that most Indigenous communities direly need. And so when they vote to support a project, what really irks them is what they see as the meddling and interference from what has been termed eco-colonialists, these groups that whose only interest is in stopping projects, and government interference, where the government is only listening to the side of the project that supports their politics. They feel it's very unfair. They feel that a lot of opportunities have been snatched from them. And it's such the feeling is so strong in Western and Northern Canada that, in fact, there's an event being organized on this very topic called Indigenous Nexus 2023.
Sorry, Mr. Helene, I'm just going to have to ask you to wrap up. We're well over on the allotted time for this one, and I still have more questions I need to get to. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, and we'll jump now to Mr. Sabera, who will have 5 minutes for his questions.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, everyone. Obviously, a very important discussion we're having this morning, and I've sort of framed the issue with regards to the ongoing transition that is happening within not only Canada's economy, but with regards to the global economy in terms of energy. As if I can do the little triangle, and you can think about it, where we have energy security, energy affordability, and then layering in the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions to where we get to a net zero world by 2050, or the countries participating and such. But we obviously have developments along the way. The war in Ukraine, obviously putting in place not only energy security, energy affordability, but food security, food affordability. What I would say is a Biden administration that has been deft at putting in place legislation that has changed the landscape, the economic landscape, both here in North America and globally, with the Infrastructure Act, the CHIPS Science Act, the $250 billion there, and the Inflation Reduction Act, which, reading from all the commentary out there, is potentially a catalyst for north of $2 trillion of private investment that will go, combined with the $497 billion or whatever the number is, but north of $2 trillion of investment that may flow in renewable energy and sources therein. Layering on top of that, knowing that the United States is the largest producer of oil and gas in the world, and actually a net exporter of resources, and that is starting with the Obama administration has built, I believe, 4 to 7 LNG facilities to export LNG. We're building LNG Canada, which I will be very happy, which will be put in place in the area of the world that I'm familiar with because I grew up there. But when regards to the projects that are currently in place here in Canada, and this is to Mr. Moore, when we think of investments, whether it's in TMX or on a private or public side, a lot of us folks may get tied up in looking at one side of the ledger. They're not looking on the other side, which are the multipliers of the economic benefits of various projects, upstream, downstream, with regards to oil and gas revenues that come into Canada and the nearly 1 million Canadians that worked in the sector. How important is that we make sure we look at not only, I would say, one side of the ledger, if I can use that term, but we also look at the other side in terms of the ramification, the multipliers to Canada's economy of both the renewable and non-renewable side of our economy.
There's a great example of what LNG can mean to an economy. If anyone here is a soccer fan and watching the World Cup, of across the world. Well, until recently, the biggest LNG exporter in the world was Qatar. The USA is it now. We let them get that opportunity. But the last 10 years since announcing the World Cup, $250 billion has been spent by a country with 300,000 citizens. They have spent $10 billion on stadiums, and one might wonder, where did they get that money? They got that money by monetizing natural gas onto the global market. Recently, during the high prices for LNG in Europe, at the peak of the early peak of the Ukraine crisis, we were seeing cargoes. It's very hard, the LNG industry globally is not very transparent. They don't talk about the value of cargoes and ships, but one can glean things if you keep an eye on things. And there were single ship loads of LNG changing hands for up to $200 million, on the high seas, going to different ports.
Mr. Moore, I'm going to interject there because I do want to have a comment, and I know you
Sure.
you could go on for a bit.
Okay.
One of the comments I heard today was about, and I believe you had referenced it, sir, was about comparative advantage. And as an economist, I learned quickly in my studies that there's absolute advantage and comparative advantage in trade. And Canada will need to, and is, finding its place on the comparative advantage front when it comes to the transition, the ongoing transition. So, for example, in the battery supply chain, we're ranked number 2 in the world according to the Bloomberg BNEF down at the G20, and we are finding a comparative advantage there. With regards to LNG, we will need to find our comparative advantage, and we quickly are. And I would like to hear from you, sir, how important and we are. Because in FES, there are a number of steps we've taken in response to the IRA. There's obviously more that we have to do to make sure we are flagging our comparative advantage.
Yeah. I think the comparative advantage in theory from resources that are known to exist here versus what we're able to do or what we're doing. In British Columbia, I know that the average time to develop a mine through permitting is 13 years. The amount of critical minerals and other metals we need is so vast that it will be very difficult, it'd be impossible. The Ring of Fire in Ontario is viewed in industry, I think, as a stalled opportunity. There's very complex issues there we're all aware of, but if we don't solve them, we won't have the wherewithal to have the clean energy future. It's a big worry. LNG is sought after in parts of the world that must rely on more emissions-intensive fuels. I know there is a determination by some voices we've heard that if a solution is not 100% effective in solving a problem, then it mustn't be pursued. I don't think that's how most of us approach anything in our lives. LNG will cause considerable relief for nations that are looking at ways, whether it's nuclear or firing natural gas instead of coal in their electricity sector, be it Korea, Japan, Malaysia, Indonesia, India. They really want this, and they also want energy security. They don't want just to rely on a single country in the Middle East to supply all of it, because that's a poor principle they found. So Canada has a role in this.
I think we're done there. I would say just
we
to
are
put
out
on
of
record
time on that one.
Yeah, that I believe we've in the FES we've started down a path where there's a very effective response, and I applaud the Deputy Prime Minister to IRA.
Pardon, Monsieur le Président, ça fait un bout.
Chair, this has been going on for a while. I'd like to be generous in time as well.
Well, I've been pretty generous with everybody's, and we have time now to go into our third and final round. So that starts with Mr. Dreeshen, who will have 5 minutes on the clock.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and certainly thanks to all of the witnesses that are here today as we take a look at subsidizing of different aspects of our federal assistance into our natural resources. I think one of the things is if you don't want oil and gas from Canada, you do your level best to demonize it around the world. And but I kind of want to take the opposite position of that. And we do have this abundance of natural resources. We've been leading the way globally with clean technologies and advancement in oil and gas sector. And I think people should realize that 75% of the clean technology investments in renewables comes from our oil and gas sector. So it's because they are understanding that they are energy companies. They're not just oil and gas companies. And I think that's the important part of it. And of course, you can't promote renewables unless you advocate for a responsible hydrocarbon industry. And I think that's really the critical part of it. I know that, Mr. Heelan, I appreciate your work. I spent many years on Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development. I've read your book, Dancing with Dependencies, and I've also seen the work that you've done with First Nations. And I'm just wondering if you can speak briefly to what needs to be done by governments in order to give opportunities to Indigenous communities, and specifically looking at the red tape, the regulatory burdens that your industry faces. What are the biggest culprits and the main things that government could do to get more investment to come to Canada so that you can be engaged with that? And you did mention before one of the key components and one of the key problems that exists, of course, is, quite frankly, environmentalists don't know what is best for Indigenous communities, nor do all industry leaders know what is best. And we need to work together to get past what I call environmental colonialists, but what you call eco-colonialism. And I'm just wondering if you can lay out your vision and some of the frustrations that you have with the way in which your industries and the opportunities for your people have been challenged over the last number of years.
Thank you for the question. I think the kind of frustration that's felt was characterized when the German Chancellor arrived in Canada asking for our LNG. I don't know in my lifetime when a German Chancellor ever even arrived in Canada to ask for something, and we're supposed to be supporting our democratic partners in Europe, and he was sent away with the promise of hydrogen in, I don't know, 10 or 15 years. And there has to be some kind of, I think, reality in the position that we're in. From a geopolitical strategic point of view, Canada is in an excellent position. We have the resources everybody else needs, where, well, all of our partners are tied up with this war in Ukraine. Our partners' resources are tied up with this war in the Ukraine from Europe. And so I think the best thing from Indigenous people's point of view is that the government can get out of the way and stop slowing and stopping everything. We have an environment in Canada where we have some of the strictest environmental and a very good social environment, and Indigenous people are coming forward and saying what they want, and it's time, I think, for government to even listen to people from different regions of Canada, because it's creating a lot of division, a lot of anxiety. If someone doesn't agree with your opinion, listen to them, because you're elected to represent them. And Indigenous people are clearly saying, we want to be part of the economy. To be part of the economy, because we were taken off our lands, we don't have any basis for raising capital. There needs to be some kind of, I think, sensible financial incentives. The Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Fund is one where they've just lent $1.2 billion for 22 First Nations to buy into Enbridge's Northern Pipeline system. That asset will provide revenue for them for long into the future. Just to make a little sports comparison, I was watching a program on TV, was about the American basketball.
Sir, we're going to have to end here. Sorry to interrupt you, but we are out of the time, and I do have others I need to get to, so my apologies. But we are going to jump to Mr. Bruce, and who Oh, sorry, Mr. Maloney, who's going to take over the next question for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks to my colleague. I may not use all the time, but we'll see how it goes. Glad to be back on this committee. It's been a while since I've been here. It brings back a whole range of emotions. I won't tell you what they are, but they vary depending on the moment and time in the committee. But having said that, Mr. Muir, I have some questions for you. I was intrigued by a couple of answers you provided. In response to Ms. Stubbs about the investment climate, I interpreted what you said as, you know, it's a darn good thing the government stepped up and bought TMX. And then when Mr. Falk was asking you questions about cost overruns, you seemed quite enthused about being able to identify the reason for those cost overruns. One of the things people, I think, know about me is I like to try to cut through the political nonsense that you see in a lot of these discussions. So blaming cost overruns on Liberals as if they would have magically disappeared if the Conservatives are in power is, of course, entirely mythical. So what I'm asking you, are you, if you accept the fact that we needed to get that pipeline built, am I correct in interpreting what you said as you're happy about the fact that the government stepped up and bought it so it could go forward?
The fact it's being built is a positive thing for Canada. The economic impacts will far outweigh the cost of building the project. I don't think, you know, had the question been asked, you know, before the acquisition was, you know, would anyone want the federal government to go and do this? I don't think anyone would have wanted to. The fact that it happened, that this acquisition was made to save a nation-building project, right. That was a difficult political decision. I can only imagine what the cabinet
it was
discussion
the right decision, is what you're saying.
But they landed in the right place,
right, okay.
Because had they
Thank you.
not, yes.
All right, I'm glad I was able to confirm.
Indeed.
That. Now, the reason that Kinder Morgan didn't go ahead with it, we can talk about the regulatory context and whatnot, but that regulatory context didn't start on October 15th, 2015, or October 19th, 2015. So it's when I got elected then, along with many of the people around this table, I was hearing about all of these regulatory obstacles that were in place, and I continue to hear that today. The fact remains that it was necessary for the government to do that. The cost overruns, I mean, had Kinder Morgan decided to go ahead and build this pipeline, they would have encountered the same cost overruns that the government's facing. Isn't that fair?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So to be critical of the government about that is unfair then. I think you have to agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, all right. So I'm glad we cleared all that up. So here we are. What's that? Yeah, well, I just wanted to clarify this because it's one of the things that's troubling about having these discussions is the political overtones, and sometimes many of us are on the same page, and that gets lost in the discussion. So that's why I wanted to make that point, and that was really the only point I wanted to make. So thank you, sir. I will give the rest of the time back to my colleague, Mr. Brusen.
Okay. My question was actually going to be for the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, if they're still there. And it was going to be about hydrogen and investments to encourage, you know, when we're talking about federal investments towards hydrogen. I believe that you've written a bit about the export of hydrogen and the opportunities. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Thank you very much for the question. So again, here's another natural resource that is getting a bit politicized in Canada. There are tremendous opportunities, including in the oil and gas industry, to do blue hydrogen. There are huge markets for blue hydrogen. There have been multi-billion dollar investments in this, including in the carbon capture to make it blue. And the government has taken a pragmatic approach, which I very much appreciate. That includes blue hydrogen financing for blue hydrogen in their hydrogen strategic plan. BC, Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec all have hydrogen strategic plans, which is a good indication that support for this resource is, on all ends of the political spectrum. As to the profitability or the feasibility of green hydrogen on the Atlantic coast, which was the main focus of discussion with the European Union, it remains to be seen. But there is every forecast, and there's private money coming into the sector, does expect a very large hydrogen economy. So I would be cautious about how fast green hydrogen and how profitable and how soon that can come out of Atlantic Canada. Blue hydrogen is much cheaper and has much bigger markets heading to Asia. But in general, I would say Canada is on the right track. There's broad political support for this, and it's very encouraging.
Okay, thank you. We're next going to go to Mr. Simard, who will have 2.5 minutes.
Merci, John.
Thank you, John. I would like to take advantage of this opportunity to discuss the motion that I placed into notice, which was sent, I believe, to all members of the committee. Perhaps I could read it again to you. Pursuant to 1081 standing order, committee rule would make so that to require the Canadian Engineering Board to produce a non-redacted copy of all the opinions and recommendations of the relative to Canadian government's decision to acquire and potentially yield as well as exploit Trans Mountain Pipeline, as well as any other relevant document. And if the Energy Board does not produce any analysis or recommendation, that the committee should be given by it a written confirmation of this.
Angus on my speaking list.
Thank you. I think it's a pretty straightforward motion coming out of our meetings the other day. I didn't feel I got a very clear set of answers from the Canadian regulator when we asked questions about the tolls and the other elements. So I think if there's documents that would be helpful to our committee, I look forward to seeing them.
Speaking list, I have Ms. DeBrussen.
Well, I guess two things, which is how long do we think this is going to go as a conversation? Because I suggest we may want to dismiss the witnesses if we think we're going to be talking about it for another 10 minutes, because we're pretty much running into the end of our meeting. So that's the first part, and then I was going to propose an amendment.
Si vous votez pour, ça peut...
If you vote in favor, it could be very brief. Well, as I said, I do have amendments that I'd like to propose, and that's why I'm asking first.
Charlie, on Julie's question.
Well, I would normally let our witnesses go, but there may be a chance that I get my 2.5 minutes in, and Mr. Simard has stepped on my toes. So I would say if we get this thing passed, then we could finish our questions off.
Okay. Just so the witnesses know, we have only until 1:02 for the resources. So if we finish this before then and we can get another couple of minutes of questions in, and you can bear with us until 1 o'clock, we'd invite you to stay, and we'll see how quickly we get through the motion. So Mr. Bruson, back to you. I think you're going to speak to some amendments.
Yes. So my first amendment that I wanted to propose is right off the top, which is that we would change the word require to request. The reason being that there hasn't been a refusal from the energy regulator, so this is that they're trying to stop this production.
Okay, on that amendment, Mr. Simard.
J'ai pas de souci.
I have no problem with that.
Okay, so do we want to put that amendment to a vote? Okay, so all in favor of the amendment as stated by Mr. Bruson? Okay, that's carried. Okay, so now we'll. We have another amendment, and then we'll come back and deal with the motions as amended, or the motion as amended. So your second amendment.
My second amendment would be to replace the words unredacted with just a. So you were asking for a series of copies. I don't have the exact wording right here, but so just replacing unredacted with a. And I see that.
Là-dessus, ce serait.
And if I could explain why, first of all.
We don't even have anything showing that there are going to be redactions yet. We don't know what that would look like. We don't have an idea of what the extent of redactions would be if there are any. So ask first for just the copies, and then if it turns out that there are all sorts of redactions that we want to question, we can go back to them.
Okay. Mario.
Il va de soi que...
Well, very clearly, having a copy with redactions would be completely unacceptable, and that's not going to enable us to do our job. I believe that the energy regulator has to provide the documents that we request, so to be able to redact any of the analysis that it did is completely unacceptable to me.
Okay, not seeing anybody else on my speaking list. I will, Charlie, Kate, Mr. Angus.
I love unredacted documents. I think that's the lifeblood of Parliament. My concern is if there's anything to do with commercial interests, we have to be careful about that. And I say that from having been on other committees where we've asked for information. So if we're going to say off the top we want all documents all unredacted, we may need to have a discussion about what happens if there's commercial sensitivities. I don't know if it's a big issue, but I think we always have to do due diligence if we're taking documents. So I'm willing to have them in unredacted form. I'm willing to see them as they are. I'm also willing, if there's issues that are flagged in terms of commercial issues that may, for example, if one company's getting a better deal than another, there may be unintended consequences. So I'd like to see if our friends in the Liberals on the government side has any recommendations as to how we could make sure that we're not stepping at a point where we may be beyond our jurisdiction.
Ms. Bruson.
My proposal was just to see what they produce and see. I mean, it might be very straightforward that once we actually get the records, we'll see if there are redactions, what they are, and it might be pretty much on its face that you can see that it's part of the business type materials. We just don't have anything to show that they're going to be severely redacted at this point, so we could ask for them, see what we get back, and then if we find that they are overly redacted, hey, I'm fine with the idea of going back and asking for them to reconsider it.
Okay, so on this one, I have an amendment that, not having anybody else in the speaker, will put to a vote. So as I understand it, Mr. Bruce, and it was to change what was it? Do you want to give it to us again, the amendment?
It would be to remove the word unredacted with just A. Like I take out those two words and then I put in the word A.
Is everybody clear on that amendment? Good amendment. Okay, so all in favor? Opposed? Okay, so that amendment is carried. So then we have, Mr. Bruson. Okay.
But we know it's a final one. It would save the best for last. December 16th is the proposed date right now. That's coming up within 2 weeks, and it's really soon. It's going to be kind of a tight timeline all around, and then everybody leaves this place. So I was going to suggest that we move it to January 20th, 2023. That is still before we come back. So it still allows us to get them before we're back in committee. Either way, we're not going to have a committee meeting immediately after, right? Like either way, you're going to have to wait until the end of January before we're sitting again and having a committee meeting. So,
Mr. Simard.
My only concern with this is to be sure that for analysts, this is okay in terms of the work that they're going to have to do afterwards if they receive it on the 20th. Will they have enough time to analyze it? That really depends how the committee wants us to use the documents. Well, I could accept the 20th. That's okay.
Then that amendment, all in favor of amending the by date to January 20th? Okay, that's all in favor. Thank you. So now we'll vote on the motion as amended. Do we need to have that written out or read out? And Kate, I'll turn to our clerk to see if she has it to give to everybody, and then we will call the vote.
The motion as amended would read that pursuant to Standing Order 1081A, an order of the committee be issued to request the Canada Energy Regulator to produce no later than January 20th, 2023, a copy of any notices, analysis, and recommendations of Canada Energy Regulator relating to the government's decision to acquire, expand, operate, and eventually divest of the Trans Mountain Pipeline system and any other relevant documents. If no such analysis has been produced by the Canada Energy Regulator, that the Canada Energy Regulator provide the committee with written confirmation.
Okay, all in favor? On division? Oh, on division, Kate.
Mr. Shahal.
Against.
Mr. Bruson.
For.
Madame Lapointe.
For.
Mr. Maloney.
Yes.
Mr. Sorbara.
Oui.
Ms. Stubbs.
In favor.
Mr. Dreeshen.
Yes.
Mr. Falk.
Yes.
Mr. Patzer.
Yes.
Mr. Simard.
Pour.
And Mr. Angus.
Yes.
Okay, that motion is carried. Thank you. Now we have 5 minutes left in the meeting. I have two 2.5-minute rounds of questions. So if you like, Mr. Simard, you still have 2 minutes and 25 seconds on your clock. If you'd like to take it, and then we'll move to Mr. Angus, and we can finish off the meeting at 1 o'clock.
Je vais faire rapide.
I'll be brief to give my friend Charlie a little bit of time. I'd like to ask a quick question of Mr. Gunton. It's about what Mr. Brooks said regarding federal government support for the oil and gas industry. That $12 billion a year from EDC, is that a sum that seems to be an accurate figure to you? And fair?
The $12 billion for what? I didn't catch that.
12 milliards de...
Yes, the $12 billion per year from EDC to the oil and gas sector. Does that seem to be a right figure to you?
Yeah, I really can't confirm that figure. It's not part of my studies.
J'aimerais peut-être entendre Monsieur Brook.
Perhaps I could hear Mr. Brook then.
Yeah, so that number is on Export Development Canada's website. It's on a list of it's called Aggregate Business Facilitated by Industry Subsector for the period ending September 30th, 2022. We can send the link to you. They list export development supports for all industries, including oil and gas, and it is their number right here on their website. $5.961 billion is the number for 2022.
Est-ce que rapidement ça prend?
Briefly, does this consider the definition of what a subsidy is, or would the figure change if we changed the WTO's definition?
Well, this is federal support to the industry, and as I referenced earlier in my comments, the WTO's definition does say that fiscal support to an industry is counted as a subsidy under their definition. So if we were to apply that definition, these would all be counted as subsidies, yes.
Merci.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now we'll go to Mr. Angus for his final 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. In September, the Alberta Federation of Labour, along with Unifor Western Canada, the Boilermakers Alberta, Building Trades Western Canada, IBEW, Steelworkers District 3, wrote to the Prime Minister saying they wanted to see serious investments in clean energy economy. Calgary Economic Development and Edmonton Global have stated that they see investments in clean tech will create $61 billion opportunity for Alberta, 170,000 jobs. And yet, Mr. Gunton, when I'm looking at kind of direct tax subsidies to oil and gas, the $18 billion you predict in tolls to undercut the cost of TMX, the $15 billion that we see from the Export Development Corporation, the $21 billion spent on TMX, this is almost the equivalent of what would be generated in the market if we actually had a clean tech economy. Do we see anything close to the scope of investments in clean tech to kickstart this economy that both the workers have been calling for and Calgary Economic Development? Anything close in comparison to what is being given right now to oil and gas?
Well, I haven't actually done a comparison of the financial support for the different sectors, but yes, if you took the $21.4 billion, which we have now committed to Trans Mountain and invested it in other sectors, or even if we increase the tolls on Trans Mountain to reduce the losses, and we would have more funding available for these high growth sectors, and so the economic benefits would be significantly higher than investing it in a declining sector, invest it in a growing sector that's clean.
I was in Germany last week, and the meeting with the German government, they were very clear. They said if we couldn't get them LNG within the next 2 years, they weren't interested. They want hydrogen. They want hydrogen at a major industrial level. Would you think, Mr. Gunton, that the $21 billion we're spending on TMX and the massive subsidies that will be given on tolls, that we could actually be putting that kind of money into a hydrogen economy and making deals in Europe right now if we were putting that money into where the Europeans are going rather than the 20th century economy that's continually be promoted by big oil?
Yes, I mean, I certainly agree with that you want to go into the growth sectors, not the declining sectors, if you want a healthy, sustainable economy.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. That brings us to the end of the time that we have for our meeting today. I'd like to thank all of the witnesses for being here with us, both in person and virtually. I'd like to also indicate that if anybody has any additional thoughts you would like to provide us with, up to 10 additional pages in writing following today's conversation, you're happy to submit that to our clerk. Based on a motion that we had for receiving testimony, we set at I think 5 o'clock on the Friday following the last hearing, which is today. So if you were going to send anything in, we would need it by the end of the day tomorrow, which I know is a tight turnaround, but that is what we're working with. And for the committee members, next meeting is November 29th, so next Tuesday. We're going to be reviewing version 2 of the draft report on the greenhouse gas emissions cap for the oil and gas sector study. And we're keeping 30 minutes at the end to provide drafting instructions.
Pardon, John.
Just a moment. If we want to have the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report on the pipeline, for that to be considered by analysts, should we be requesting it right away?
Any material that we can get in right away, and yes. Would be if we can always ask if that's not possible, we can have them request an extension, and then I'd have to bring it back to the committee on Tuesday for that.
I believe the document is public.
If nothing else, folks, thank you for the good meeting today, and folks, we're adjourned. Oops, there we go.